It's almost good afternoon. I think we're still in good morning.
5 minutes.
Right, so this session is on Asia Sustainable Development, and we've got a very diverse panel here. The purpose of this session is to actually talk about how markets in Asia can actually produce more benefits for more Asian citizens, and how we can actually meet our environmental constraints in Asia and also our resource constraints. So in order to kick off the discussion, I thought I would just sort of point out two kind of big trends which seem to be working at odds with each other. The first is that a lot of people have noticed that Asia is so-called leading the green revolution in terms of when you look at the amount of spending that is going into green technology and new technology and smart tech. Actually, Asia is far ahead of the pack in terms of percentage of GDP. So you may have heard figures like Korea's, 80% of its stimulus program as a result of the global financial crisis was actually in green technology, and China is actually devoting more and more percentage of its GDP to green tech. And the level of spending that is going on towards urbanization, new technologies in China in terms of infrastructure is actually pretty phenomenal. And a lot of that's being done in the Pearl River Delta. And there's a lot of new policy incentives and environmental regulations that are being put into Asia to actually move the region farther along towards the green economy. But at the same time, a lot of Asian governments are very worried about global rebalancing, and they're trying to rebalance their economies towards consumption. They're trying to grow the middle class, grow Asian consumption, and as we all know, consumption is actually one of the problems with us running up against our global environmental constraints. So the the big challenge here is actually how do we balance these two models, in that we want a greener economy and we want one that is actually more socially just, but all we have to work with is actually our old model of consumption, a consumption-driven economy. So in order to reconcile these two big trends, we've got a panel here, and our panel is very distinguished. We're going to start with Lord Nicholas Stern, who everybody sort of probably knows. You were the former economist of the World Bank, one of the first major economists to actually come out and say that climate change is something we should be spending on today in order to avert. And so we'll start with you and then turn to Dr. Supachai and Cherie.
Thank you very much, Pamela, and I very much share the way you've expressed the introduction in terms of the focus of Asia on these issues. And if you're close to half the world's population and more than half the world's growth, then Asian issues are global issues, and global issues are Asian issues through sheer force of the sheer weight of the numbers. But let me start with some fairly brutal arithmetic on emissions and climate change, and then say something about policies and finance. I'll try to do that very rapidly. But the arithmetic really matters, and it often gets lost in the discussion. The world is emitting close to 50 billion tons CO2 equivalent of greenhouse gases annually. If we're to have even a 50-50 chance of holding to 2 degrees centigrade above the 19th century in terms of global surface average temperature, even a 50-50 chance of 2 degrees, we have to take that 50 now well below 35, 20 years from now, and well below 20 billion tons 40 years from now. Those numbers are crucial. 50 now, 35, say, in 2030, and below 20 in 2050. That's absolute decline. If you ask then, well, let's hope the world's income multiplies by a factor of around 3 in those next 40 years, then you've got to do an absolute reduction of a factor of 2.5. You've got output growing by 3, so emissions per unit of output have got to come down by 3 multiplied by 2.5, by a factor of 7.5. Now, there's no precision here. A factor of 7 or 8 or something like that. That surely is an industrial revolution. Changing your energy efficiency, changing your source of energy, stopping deforestation. But if you just look at the energy side, that's an energy industrial revolution. It's a transformation if you're dividing emissions per unit of output by a factor of 8. So that arithmetic is basic, and it takes us straight to the right concept of all this, which is a great wave of technological change. If you look at the numbers for the individual countries, China is now about 9 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, of that nearly 50 in the world. China, if you take the 12th five-year plan and the particular numbers that Yu Ming-kang presented yesterday, which I commented on, China will go from 9 to 12 in this next decade. If China peaks, as Liu Ming-kang described, is the current sort of picture, in 2030, that means China would probably peak about 15 billion tons, 1-5. Remember I said that the overall budget for any chance of 2 degrees, and even 50-50 chance, for the world was below 35. If China's 15, there's no way the world is going to be below 35 in 2030. We just have to recognize the arithmetic. And bearing in mind, China is trying very hard. So this is a measure of the challenge that we face. We can't sort of potter along, because delay is very dangerous. This is a ratchet effect, the concentrations build up, and we lock in high carbon infrastructure. So those two reasons mean that delay is dangerous. That's a measure of the challenge. Now, the cheerful part of the story is that industrial revolutions are very exciting periods. They lead to lots of discovery, and where we're trying to go is cleaner, quieter, safer, more energy secure, more energy efficient, more biodiverse, much more attractive. So it's a very attractive story that we're trying to create, but we're going much too slowly. What are the policies we need to get there? Well, we're going to hear, I'm sure, lots of discussion on that. A price for greenhouse gases is clearly a part of that, a fundamental part of that. But there's much more to the story. Policies on R&D, policies on networks, policies on capital markets. These are all areas where markets fail in important ways, and where government policy is going to be very important. The greenhouse gas price is fundamental, but it's got to be much more than that in the way that I described. And policy has to be clear and credible. One of the things we've suffered from in Europe is fits and starts. I mean, one thing the United States has suffered from is probably not starts, but it all depends where you look. You know, I haven't got time to go into the detail, but if you look at California and the US Navy, then the picture looks much better than if you just look at policies in DC. But I've described the range of policies that count. It must be the greenhouse gases, but please, we make a fundamental mistake if we stop there. R&D, networks, grids, public transport, and so on. Capital markets are fundamentally important. So clear and credible policies covering the range that I described. And finally, the importance of finance. And if the policies are clear and credible, then we do see the private sector looking ahead. It's a future focused entirely on hydrocarbons is clearly not credible, and no sensible industry would put its money there. But it does need clear and credible policies to give the confidence to go the low carbon route. Sometimes that confidence can come from the right kind of financial backing. We're getting a green investment bank off the ground in the UK. I worked in the EBRD as chief economist, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, for 6 years. The presence of the right kind of development bank in a project or program can help with reducing policy risk. Companies that could have bought the EBRD invested in Central and Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union. Companies which could have bought the EBRD nevertheless wanted the EBRD partnership because it reduced policy risk. That's one reason why I think this idea of the BRICS-led bank, which was given strong support in the BRICS summit in February in Delhi, I think is so important. I've been involved in helping with the ideas for that. That's an example where the presence of a development bank can reduce risk. The BNDES in Brazil is another example where the presence of a development bank can reduce risk. So this is the idea where you've got a development bank partnering with with private sector finance, which will give the big bulk of the resources. But the presence of a development bank, I think, can be very valuable. But if you put together clarity on policies, some participation by the right kind of development bank, then it seems to me that private investment will be leading the charge. And if you look back over any past industrial revolutions, it has to be private investment that leads the charge.
Thank you, Lord Stern. You said that Europe has a lot of fits and starts, and let me assure you that actually in Asia we have those too. So I'd like to turn to Dr. Supachai, who probably also needs no introduction. You're a former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Commerce of Thailand, and then you've contributed to the formation of APEC, former Director General of the WTO, now in your second term at the UN Conference on Trade and Development. Can you tell us a little bit more about what should be happening in terms of policy and in terms of the political arena, both at the global level and local levels, especially as you see them here in Asia?
Thank you very much, Pam. I would like to build up my argument by first making some points about the way we need to change the paradigm of our development concepts so that we can handle the issues of sustainability right. Because if we don't change this paradigm, we'll be stuck with a sort of market-based policies that every time government steps in, there would be some kind of intervention that we don't need. Or if we want to do some good smart regulatory framework, it's not done in the right manner. So I would like to paint a picture that we need to do some change in our mindset. Secondly, I want to discuss a little bit on how some of these conceptual frameworks could be translated into terms of policy action. Because we don't need only theoretical concepts, but we need to have practical policies that could be implemented and could be assessed all the time. And thirdly, I would say a little bit about the inconsistency, particularly in Asia, the way we try to marry democracy with a way that we should guide our next generation of development cooperation and development programs in a strategic way that we can engage in changes. Now, the first one on perceptions. All the time, and now you can see as we move to our next UN meeting on sustainability at Rio Plus 20, a couple of weeks from now in June in Brazil, we are now having a very intensive debates in New York and in Geneva on how we can deal with putting the so-called green economy concept into practice. Green economy. Does green mean all the trees and forests and all this sort of thing? No. For us, green economy means inclusive development. It means inclusive development. And for us, green economy should mean that we need multilateral solution to what Nick just said. We can do things a lot in our region, in Asia, individually in countries, but the real solution must be first the global solution. So for the green economy to take effect, it must have the backup of multilateral support. For example, in the areas that we'll be looking at how to set up a sort of green fund to be able to make use of the fund so that countries that would need to come to grip with their poverty issues can at the same time make use of additional funds, not only to do their policy right with the poverty reduction, but at the same time to be using the new ways and the low-hanging fruits to link it with a poverty reduction, like what they do in India, to have villages being involved in the renewable energies by having women every day coming with their lanterns who have a charge using solar cells. These are the low-hanging things, low-hanging technology that could be used at the same time to deal with poverty and also to deal with the technology that we need to adopt to guarantee clean and carbon neutral or low carbon development. We need also to be able to understand that in order to have this green fund, I think Nick has been saying something about investment. From outside at UNCTAD, we believe that, as again, Nick has been saying for many years, this is a whole industrial revolution in itself. This is just like industrial revolutions in the 19th century. It's just like the revolution of the IT in the 21st century. This is a whole new cycles of investment. This is a Schumpeterian long cycles. So from this, we must be able to adopt the kind of investment policies or FDI, foreign direct investment policies, that could link investment with what we call at the UN, we call it sustainable investment. So at the moment, we are putting up together with different institutions around the world, including the World Bank and the FAO and the UN system, to see how sustainable development, sustainable investment could be quantified in terms of policies. So countries, when they do, and you know there are now more than 6,000 international investment agreements, IIAs, and more than 6,000 bilateral IIAs. And just a few of them, most of them will be actually emphasizing on the rights of the investors and the rights of the host countries and things like that, but very little on the implications of FDIs on sustainability. So countries are now trying to put that in, and we have our own sets of principles so that they can adopt that kind of policies. We are now also working to so-called change the mindsets, or to try to work with the entrepreneurs in the private sector by doing something along the line of the so-called, what they call, let me have a look here, the ESG, the environmental, social, and corporate governance. We do this together with a group of so-called sustainable stock exchanges around the world. We have created a forum for sustainable stock exchanges, and then now half of the whole world stock exchanges that are in this forum with us to be looking at the standard practices in linking stock exchanges activities with sustainable economic development. In one area, we've been working on the standard of reporting, sustainability reportings on carbon footprints, on how much they are doing to be able to promote certain green economies in certain areas. We also are asking all these participating stock exchanges, sustainable stock exchanges, to adopt the kind of listing requirement involving also the record of carbon footprints of the newly listed company. And in Asia, there are a number of stock exchanges in Indonesia, Malaysia, Hong Kong. They're all parts of this, this forum, and we are trying to expand this to cover the whole world. So this is an area in which we are trying to bring in the private sector to be involved in this new concept that you have to link nearly everything in everyday life with this kind of new set of criteria. Now the second part is in the area of turning all this into policies and to have the policies make us understand this. This is the part that has created for us at the UN the greatest difficulties, because we understand that the political life cycle is very short. What we're talking is about long-term involvement to get on the sustainability bandwagon. And policymakers, politicians come and go. So you would see in many countries, when one of the standard recommendations is to tax fossil fuel much more than in the past, to levy heavy taxes on fossil fuel, and to give subsidies to renewable production. Now, if you look around in the world, and you look around in Asia particularly, the greatest concern is that although there has been some efforts to tax, to allow the prices of fossil fuels to go up, it's not always easy. It can have the effects of actually failing governments. Governments can really go into crisis if they go against, they said, so-called the will of the people to have cheaper sources of energy. So in many places around the world, I was just talking to my colleague from Indonesia and also my colleagues from the Minister Marie Pengestu in Bangkok when I was attending the World Economic Forum in Bangkok. She was telling me about Indonesian government efforts to introduce new bill into the parliament some weeks ago to raise the price of oil. And it was defeated in the parliament. Same thing as my own government, the government of my own country in Thailand. The first thing they came in as a government, they came and they said, look, we're going to do away with the oil fund. And we're not to collect any fees for the oil fund. We're going to use all this oil fund money to stabilize and to reduce the prices of oil. At this time that the oil prices are declining. So what we are seeing at the moment is that politicians are just behaving in an opposite way, on the contrary to what we are saying. And they are not really subsidizing renewables very much. You see renewable production, only exception of China maybe, but the rest of Asia, I don't see much work being done in trying to help to promote. In some areas, maybe yes, but the way that the complexities of the tax regime is still very much counterproductive to allow renewable energy companies to grow up. So the change of the mindset, not only in the way we work with business, but in the way what we practice, the long-term developmental strategies that would have to be understood, have to be taken up in the national strategies and maintained and implemented consistently by the politicians. This is really an uphill task, and I do think if the Fung Institute could also help to bring in more policymakers, more politicians to be involved with us, not only among ourselves to be listening to academics and business, we're all sold to the ideas already. But a huge number of politicians in Asia that they may have heard of all the things, but they would say, this is, charity begins at home. In my constituency, I don't get elected if I go for higher taxation. I keep telling them that, the tax effort in Asia is very small. To do social protection in Asia is not to go and announce that I'm going to cover this as a universal coverage for health and everything, because you can't do it, because the tax coverage is not there. So you have to start by telling the people that I'm going to tax you more so that you can have a better care in education, in health and everything. Now, the last point I would like to end up is in the areas of international practices. We're going to Rio Plus 20. And in New York at the moment, they cannot agree on anything at the moment. The outcome document for Rio Plus 20 is still very much in the doldrums and looks very bleak. When we are talking like this in Asia, I think, yes, we can look this through the Asian lens and see what the Asians can do, but this is a globalized village. I don't think what we do in Asia would meet with really the kind of echoing without really the participation of the rest of the world, and particularly our colleagues from the advanced economies. And so going to Rio Plus 20, and I can just cite one example, and then I will end in trade, Pamela. In the areas of trade, there are countries these days who are trying to adopt the right policies to promote renewable energy production. But there are so many trade conflicts being presented to the WTO at the moment at the dispute settlement body in the areas of what is happening with the taxation regime, subsidy regime, what concern renewables. With Canada, with China, many with China, with Brazil. There's so many countries that are now being taken to task to the WTO because there is a lack of clarity between the trade rules and the environmental rules. So I hope that with Rio Plus 20, if we come out of that meeting, not with an agreement, I don't think we can ever have an agreement on how to reconcile the trade rules and the climate rules overnight, because it has taken us 10 years and we are not yet seeing the end of the lights for the Doha Development Agenda. But UNCTAD is proposing at Rio Plus 20 that we should create a green economy forum, wherein all these matters concerning multilateral trade and multilateral climate change policy, climate policies, should be taken up by this forum, not for negotiations, but just to sort out what are the priorities, which areas. Is it green mileage? Is it the kind of the processing, the production processes that cannot be handled by the WTO at the moment, because the WTO only handles the border trade, not inside the border. So we have to take the inside the border kind of issues up front. Carbon taxes, can we handle that at the border? Can we also handle the kind of transition from normal development strategy into lower carbon development strategies by keeping the rate of economic expansion in a healthy manner? We need some adjustment period, some funds. We need to be able to make use of the CDM, the traditional clean development mechanism that used to be part of the old regime coming from Kyoto, that has not been fully used by the countries, but really used by a few major developing countries. How can we make that a more multilateral deal so that the CDM can be applied by everyone, so that when we get on the bandwagon to have a new round of investment cycles, that this can be used to support the kind of sustainable investment that we would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Supachai. So you've outlined a lot of big challenges for global policy, and as well for local politicians who do one thing and say another. Cherie, turning to you, you are running one of the world's biggest tire manufacturers, active in both Indonesia and China. And even in an adverse policy environment, what do you think business should be doing? What has been your own experience? And how can business sort of be an active agent of change, even when global policy isn't moving, or when national policy is not moving?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Is this better?
Yeah, maybe just speak up a bit.
Okay.
I think if you just start, it'll come.
All right. Thank you, Pamela. And I'm very honored to be with you and with Lord Nick, the General Supachai, who I guess represent the government as well as the civil society. And from the business perspective, I think your question on making markets work for the millions, I do believe that markets work for the millions, but we are in a situation to ask the question, does market work for the billions? We have reached 7 billion people. And I think Dr. Supachai has said we need a paradigm shift on the development model, on the market model. And as to whether businesses should take responsibility, I think in Chinese there's a belief that we should look at ourselves first. And I fully believe businesses have to take responsibilities. And I think there has been some encouragement. It's encouraging sort of developments after sort of the various crises led by a lot of the academic institutions. I think Michael Porter has talked about the need to look at shared value. So instead of just looking at just shareholder profits as the only sort of objectives, that companies should also look at the shared value. It's actually a win-win approach where I think there have been very interesting examples. And he said all profits are not made equal. And I think, we have been through the 97, 98 financial crisis. Indonesia has been quite hard hit. Our family has also suffered through that. We have learned lessons. Countries, jobs, development can go backward a long time with a crisis like that. And I think recently there's been a lot of blame on banks. And I think, that products being sold that they don't understand and spreading the risk. But I think we need banks. We need big banks. We cannot just demonize the situation. They also support the real sector. But how can Asian finance system, financial sector and banks, and also the framework learn from this so that, you know, or we help these institutions to have a sort of, it's kind of like a create new products. If in order to do shared value, you can look at some of the products may be sort of more toxic, so to speak, than other products. You know, and there could be support on how to withdraw from, it's kind of a withdrawal from, you know, maybe the casino type of incentives, incomes. There can be other incomes, and I want to bring one hopeful example, because I think Dean Alan White from MIT is here, and we work with MIT on the program. We started maybe more than 10 years ago, a foundation, education foundation, United in Diversity. And our thinking, that was after the Indonesian crisis. And our thinking was that, you know, we need to move forward. And I think Dean White, I remember very well on the phone call, he was on a camelback in Egypt. And he was saying, oh, Cherie, you know, a big conference talking about the inclusive approach with leaders and tri-sectors, business, government, civil society, talking about moving forward is not going to change anything. But we need to build the future leaders, the future tri-sector leaders. So we started, and we actually searched for it, and we had, we were very fortunate because Otto Sharma and Peter Senge have developed this new program, a leadership program that engages all three sectors, and it's very well thought out. We have sent now close to 100 leaders from business, government, civil society. And one of them I brought to Tsinghua University 2 days ago to speak to Tsinghua, because we have just started the program in China. And she's at the helm of BNI, which is a state bank in Indonesia, the oldest state bank. And she used this methodology, which it takes too long to explain, but basically she explained one of the outcomes. And she is one of just, you know, the many positive outcomes from each of these fellows. And she explained how she transformed the whole bank, where, you know, in the past, they don't have to even think of customers. Customers come to them, but she had to change the mindset. Started with 100 senior executives, then 1,000 middle managers, and now they were coming up, engaging with the civil society, and coming up with products which would actually may help those who are non-bankable become bankable. And they become very, and she said the bad debt and the lucrative part of it is actually better than the big businesses. So I asked her to send me her criteria, which involves environment, the cultural, it is really shared value, I think. And I also want to raise an example of the tri-sector approach is Walmart, because we're very, we invited chairman of Walmart, Rob Walton, who, you know, in the early days, and I think they're celebrating their 50th anniversary, and I saw, you know, some investors were sort of some disgruntled, but from what we know of the family and Rob Walton, I think he has done so much for the environment. And the way it started was Conservation International. Again, you know, innovation and breakthrough paradigm needs you to go out of your usual realm and get across sectors. And the Conservation International sort of got together with Rob Walton, and it's a very interesting story how it all started, but they, you know, through several dives and meetings, they started to realize what Walmart could do, and he also invited the senior management, and my husband is on the same board, so they went together. At that time was Lee Scott to China and look at all the supply chain, all the innovation and energy savings, and I think, you know, they have done a lot more, I think businesses can do so much if they are willing to take on this responsibility. And I think there are many other research. Tarun Khanna has written on billions of entrepreneurs. So not only do we need to help big institutions, banks, or businesses think about shared value, but billions of entrepreneurs, because we have to think about the inequity issues. And Professor Kaplan has also prepared something to make it implementable down to the balanced scorecard. So I think there is hope, and I fully think that I always feel very touched when I see statesmen instead of politicians, and how we need the same process for politicians, for civil societies, and then I think we will be closer to sustainable development for Asia and the world.
Thank you, Cherie. I think you actually hit on a very important point, which is what does it take to get us out of our business as usual? What does it take to actually drive the level of investment that Mr. Stern has actually referred to? And so what I'd like to do is actually say, given the scale of the challenge, and given the likelihood, as Dr. Supachai pointed out, that we're not going to get a globally comprehensive deal on sustainable development at the global policy level. But what are the one or two major policy actions, specific, that could be done, and which would actually drive business and incentivize business to get out of business as usual, to start making more investments into the green economy, to start making more investments into renewable technologies and renewable energy? So I'd like to hear one or two sort of focused policy suggestions, and then I'd actually like to turn to the audience, because I see several major investors and investing companies in the audience, like CLP and like Dow, and like Joe Ferrigno, and Jose. And so I'd like to actually hear from you, what do you want global government and policymakers to actually do, which would actually give you the freedom to actually break out of business as usual and start, playing your part in moving toward the green economy. So to you, Lord Stern and Dr. Supachai, and then prepare yourselves to be called on.
When you think about policy on this, the most important lesson at the beginning is that there's no slam dunk or hole-in-one, or however you like to, silver bullet, however you like to describe it. You do need clarity on price and regulation of emissions of greenhouse gases. And governments can do that. They can start, as my friend Supachai said, by stopping subsidizing the things that are doing the damage, which are hydrocarbons. And there are hundreds of billions of subsidies on hydrocarbons. So stop doing that. Start taxing coal. That's beginning in both China and India, but it's got a long way to go. And support for R&D. I could go on, but you asked me to limit. But those are ways, concrete ways, where the intention of governments would be signaled in a clear and strong way. I've mentioned finance. I won't repeat that, but I do think involvement of development banks in this process is another way of signaling long-term commitment. There'll only ever be a fraction of the money, but their presence does matter. And if you put those together with the power of the example that Cherie was talking about, what you want is the policies, and those policies to be clear, but you want also to show that people really can do this and are doing this, that it's not just some construct or theoretical construct or a new perspective. It's more than that. There are ways of doing it that really make a difference. And there's so many examples now already in advances of energy efficiency. You've got the Walmart example, and it's not just Walmart. I mean, Cherie was starting with that, but it is actually a good example because they've grappled not only with themselves, but also with the whole supply chain. Clarity of policies, help with finance, good examples.
Okay, Dr. Supachai,
Yes.
one or two policy
Yes.
recommendations.
Could I complement to what Nick just said, first on finance? I think it is, of course, finance will not solve everything, but I think we really need to succeed in setting up the so-called Global Green Fund, as has been committed by most countries from Copenhagen meeting. And this is not a big deal, and Nick has been talking about how to strengthen the role of the development banks, and this is something that we have proposed to the UN system on UNFCCC and the negotiations going on. Another area which you may not like it so much, but this is, I think, that's why I talked about paradigm change and mindset. People don't like to be taxed, but we believe that in order to get cheap finance or budgetary financing to help poor countries to get on the bandwagon of green economy, they need to have some supplementary financing, grants, not loans. So one area that we used to discuss and talked about, but it's not very widely at the moment accepted as consensus, is to tax financial transactions. It will be a very minuscule rate, but of course, in principle, financiers, bankers do not want to be taxed exceedingly, and I would agree. But as you look into the situation of the world at the moment, there is very little way except by just, we're doing this capitalization of development banks, but to tax 0.001% on the financial transactions, we would have billions of dollars to be able to put up as a global green fund that could emulate what CDM used to be doing, is to introduce low carbon investment to something like the mechanism of the clean development mechanism. This is one area. Second area, and I will stop at that, is in technology. We haven't discussed enough on technology because at my institution at UNCTAD, much as we would like to see as us trying to promote partnerships for development around the world, there's still a lot of trust deficit among the North and the South. I mean, this is just true. But what we are trying to say here is that we need to have transfer of technology. And the technologies are available. And they're not always very expensive. They're low-hanging. But we need to have some urges, some support, some facilities from the governments. But the governments, particularly from the developed country sides, keep telling me that they don't own the technologies. Although I know that they subsidize, they support technologies and research processes a lot. I don't need to have free transfer technology. I need technology to be transferred in a more simple manners for the poor countries. Sometimes for free, yes, like open platform for the internet, for the ICT processes. But here, we have proposed something which is very concrete, which is the Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights Agreement, the TRIPS. As you know, that a few years ago, at WTO, we have amended the TRIPS to be able to allow certain exemptions so that some pandemics like HIV, AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis could be better assisted because we allow parallel importing, compulsory licensing. It makes things cheaper, accessible. We have proposed the same thing, same exercise that we have done on TRIPS for pandemics, for essential medicines, to be also performed for the climate area. So to have exemptions so that some of this technology could be transferred or could be reverse engineered in a way that people can learn more quickly, and so that they could get on the bandwagon. Because otherwise, even with the fundings, if there is no transfer of technology, they have to wait a long, long time, unless China has become so advanced that they can turn around and say, okay, we have developed this much technology, we can turn around and help the rest of the South. But this is not going to happen. I think we need really, and coming out of Rio Plus 20, besides funding, besides the institutional change of UNEP, UN Environment Program, besides so many things, we need green fund, we need technology transfer that could be much and much more facilitated in the past.
Thank you. So those two, and then added to the ones by Mr. Stern, stopping subsidies, start to tax coal, and to have more involvement of the development banks. So can we have some reactions from the audience? What do you think? Mike?
I'm Michael Edisis. I have a question specifically for Dr. Stern, because you seem to concede, and I think most people concede, that the level of emissions that will continue will not keep the climate, the progress of climate change out of the danger zone. And it's been suggested that the most dangerous, the greatest danger is from the possibility of extreme scenarios, even if unlikely. And you probably know the economist Marty Weitzman has suggested that what we need then is quote unquote fast geoengineering preparedness to get ready some geoengineering projects that can be launched very quickly if it looks like something is, we're getting some runaway climate change. Even if it's unlikely, it could happen. I'm just wondering what you think about that idea.
I should say I've interacted a lot with Marty Weitzman over the past 40 years about lots of things. And his emphasis on uncertainty and risk is an emphasis that I absolutely share, and we both talk about that. But the first remark is that we don't have to miss this one. If you ask me to bet whether we will miss the kind of targets that I've described, I fear that it's quite likely that we will, but we don't have to. And so the first part of the response is that if we really accelerate and take this problem seriously, we can embark on a different path which is far more attractive than the path we're on. So I don't want to sort of start with the assumption that we're lost on this, because by far the best outcome is to embark on the industrial revolution that I'm just describing. Do we need to think about geoengineering? Sadly, we do. But there are two huge changes. If we try to stop the energy coming in by tossing dirt into the atmosphere in some shape or form, we probably can stop the energy coming in. But that leaves the CO2 there. That means that the oceans will continue to get acidified. And of course, there are all kinds of other things that might happen that we don't know about. So whilst we need to know a lot more about geoengineering, we know enough to recognize it as likely to be extremely dangerous. So yes, we should continue trying to understand it a lot better. There's a good Royal Society report in the UK on exactly that. But whilst we do it, we should recognize that it's probably extremely dangerous, and the much less dangerous path is to embark on the kinds of directions that we were describing.
There are other comments? Yeah?
Yeah,
Nicholas?
Pamela. Pat Dawson with Dow Chemical. We consume a lot of energy, and I think there's been a lot of good recommendations made up here. I think some you have to be careful about, but the two that I think are most obvious, one around energy efficiency. That's talked about a lot, but I think governments and the private sector could work a lot more together in changing some of the building codes, regulations, and by the way, not just buildings. The third largest consumer of energy is appliances. And so how you give incentive, not subsidy, but how you give incentive to business to come up with more energy efficient materials pays huge dividends. Our company's invested about $1 billion in the last 15 years in energy efficiency, and we've gotten a return of $9 billion. And that's documented in our shareholder statements. So $1 billion investment, $9 billion in return on just saving energy, not putting all the dirt, the carbon up in the atmosphere, right? I think the other point is around R&D incentive. We have 600 scientists in China right now, and we've got them focused. 25% of the projects that we're working on in China is directed around energy efficiency, energy storage, how you connect wind into the grid in China, how we work with the China government on that connectivity through our electronic materials technology, through our other technology that's used in transmission, more efficient transmission of power. So I think the R&D side of this has to be done in conjunction with the efficiency side of it. One word of caution on a carbon tax. I think you have to make sure that while the intent is good, you have to be careful that you don't let that become a source of revenue for the government in terms of how they use that as opposed to the intent of a carbon tax. So I think that's a tricky issue. Intention is good, but let's not have the governments think that they're going to make money from this as opposed to using that to incentivize the technology, the efficiency, and these types of things. Thank you.
I think we have a couple more comments from the audience, and then we'll do a collective response. So Jeremy, and then Nicholas Salmo-Smith.
Yeah, Jeremy Hobbins from Lee and Fung. Thank you very much for your comments. Without going through a whole list of what we're doing at Lee and Fung, let me just say that we're extremely focused, particularly with our vendor base. We use 15,000 factories around the world to help in the manufacturing process. And I accept that there's a huge job to be done in upgrading the standards in many of those places, and we're working actively on that. But I want to turn to another part of the equation here, and I particularly wanted to ask Lord Stern for his views on this. The elephant in the room on this subject is the expansion of the population of planet Earth. You could say that human beings have really overrun, to the detriment of all other species, the population here. Now, I know you're a man of many talents, and I don't expect you to single-handedly be able to control the future population, but what are your thoughts on how planet Earth is, on population growth? Does business have any responsibility to try and help with controlling the population? Do we have any right to have any influence on this? This subject must have come up, I presume, during your vast experience in this, so I'm just interested in that. And I want to link that with one particular business issue, and that is that can business live without growth? If we assume at some stage populations will plateau, if we look at Japan, for example, and there are other examples, if we look a few years ahead in China, how does business live without growth? And not just growth in population, but growth in the appetite of the populations as people move up the value chain, and instead of planting rice, they're driving Ferraris, to use a very obvious euphemism. Your comments on that, please.
Let's take the comment from
Nick Salmo-Smith. I hesitate to follow Jeremy's very good questions, but a slightly different comment and a broader question. The preamble about this session talks about starting with the premise that markets need not be unjust. And I think one of the things we need to worry most about is the implied assumption that most people think markets are unjust. Now, if a market is pricing a product to find out if somebody wants to pay for it and properly incorporating the cost of inputs into that product, it seems to me a market price is one of the most valuable things we have here. And indeed, some of Lord Stern's comments about not subsidizing is directly relevant to that. So my question is, where we've got externalities like resource use and pollution, the problem is not so much a market failure as the lack of the pricing of that input. Now, we've been talking about that in terms of carbon and perhaps pollution more generally, but as the world gets more populated, as Jeremy was saying, should we be thinking about other resource use? Water is the obvious one, but there may be others that we're also failing to price as an input. And that if we allow that to continue, even if miraculously we fix CO2, in 20 years' time we'll be saying, damn, we missed these three other things, where we've now got a real problem, because we had a whole global economic environment that was failing to price the cost of these inputs.
Okay, so if there's no other comments from the floor, then let's just turn to the panel. And we have, how does business live without growth? Do we have too many people? And should business play a role in controlling that? And how
Pamela, just to
should
stop you for a
markets
second.
more
Pamela. Can I just one very quick addition to your comment there. I thought that was great because one of the premises that you've talked about today, especially Lord Stern, was with one reference to the Industrial Revolution. The second one was the IT revolution, which these are big paradigm shifts that move markets and government and consumers and et cetera. So people are in the know to go towards a goal. Now, I can't help thinking, where we're dealing with today is very different. Granted, we need a paradigm shift in order for us to meet the target of sustainability for the future generations. The issue is the past two paradigm shifts were demand-driven by consumers who have always been looking for what's good for me. So the factories make, more volumes, thereby prices go down. It's good for me. And from a social, economic, and political standpoint, if gas prices go down, that's good for me. I'll vote for you. So that's very natural. It's very instinctual. Same for IT. If I can communicate better at a cheaper cost, telephone costs, long distance used to cost $10. Now it's $1. It's great. I'll buy it. So these are big movements. And you can see the civil and government working together. Now, the issue with the current situation is this is really something that's for the greater good. And how do you price in the greater good, which is in conflict with what's good for me? How do you deal with it? How do you price it in? How do you price it in such a sense that the individual, the consumer, won't think that, hey, this is more expensive, but the government or the corporations or the Dow Chemical is making the money. Okay, you can tell me you've returned certain goods in a quantifiable value to the environment, but what does it mean for me? So to me, this ought to be some kind of mechanism, whether through education or whatnot, to deal with this in order to give this paradigm shift a real shove. Otherwise, it's probably not going to work for a while. So thanks.
Okay, so we have some very specific and very broad issues to deal with. If I can ask the panel to you make sort of two-minute final remarks, because we're going to get pushed out of here by lunch. So let me turn to Cherie first.
I think in terms of sort of for the policies or the input to the CGI, I think maybe we start with ourselves, just something very simple. Maybe not to have these bottles around in the car. I mean, just start. We start from ourselves and maybe try to turn the aircon down a little bit so that it will save some energy for the hotels we work in. But I think I think I've talked about the business side. Maybe on the policy side, I actually thought, Dr. Supachai, I feel we should consider some kind of tax to create some revenue stream that would really support some of the causes that are needed even to support CGI for your sustainability research. I do feel that, maybe tax those, programmed trading, naked shots even, I think there should be different tax. I mean, Bill Gates has also suggested it. I think for those that are long-term, this is about the mentality. I think we have to reduce the short-term mentality, and maybe longer-term investments, transactions should be taxed differently from those that are just in and out, that are completely, I had breakfast with Larry, maybe it's just one last part. I think Larry Lau was just saying that global currency transaction is 1.5 quadrillion. That number is even hard to understand. It's 1,000 trillion. And the actual real trade is only 20 trillion. So we live in a world where Keynes has said, national capital development should not be premised upon a casino. We really have to relook at the whole system. More focus should be on these real sustainable issues and not on a casino market. Thank you.
Dr. Supachai.
There's two things, Pamela. First things about the role of the state. Alfred Marshall, father of neoclassical economics, used to say about markets that they're just like nature. They work well when they don't have to make a jump. Markets work well when they don't have to make a jump. But for sustainability to be accepted as part of the policy strategy of countries, particularly in Asia, we have to make quite a quantum jump. And therefore, we're not saying whether markets are just or unjust. We're just saying that markets are not sufficient, not adequate to get this into the strategy. It needs to be led by governments together with the private sector. And so I would like to advise the Fung Institute that if they could help us, because Nick and I and we at the UN, we're trying to work in a way that the awareness of this could be accepted by the public, by the constituencies, so that when politicians have to act, they would know that in spite of the paradigm change, they are not acting against the will of the consumers, that they are well informed, better informed. This is much needed. The second part is a global role that I kept going back to. As much as we would like to look at this through the Asian lens, there is no way that this is a linked effect. I mean, global environmental issues are just all interrelated, more so than finance and everything. So we need really that Asian policymakers and the rest of the world to be able to sit down together and see how much we can put real actions into the common but differentiated responsibility. You know, this has become a mantra, something that we cannot actually put in the kind of policies, who is going to do what? There's a common responsibility that must be differentiated according to the capabilities of the countries. This has to be really accepted by the international community and implemented.
Dawson was saying about what Dow Chemicals is doing seems to be a very important example. And energy efficiency in particular looks to be about half of what we able to contribute about half what we need to do in cutting emissions from energy sources. So that is a fundamentally important point, and it's encouraging that firms like Dow Chemicals, Walmart, and others are pushing ahead on that. The use of the revenues from carbon taxes, supporting R&D, and protecting the poorest seem to me to be very high on the list of priorities. Population, well, essentially, population is a combination of death rates and birth rates. You can raise death rates or you can lower birth rates. I assume you were talking about the latter, not the former, but if you want to go for the former, free cigarettes for the over 30s or something would do the former. But if you focus on the latter, then it seems to me we do understand in large measure what affects birth rates. It's education for girls and women, involvement of girls and women in the labour force, rising standards of living, lowering infant mortality rates, and access to reproductive health care. Those are things which actually I take it, I hope I can take it, that most of us would regard as very important in their own right, even if you've never heard about climate change. Obviously, it's strengthened. But basically, the reason that population is going to go from 7 billion to 9 billion in the next 40 years is the number of women in childbearing age at that time, even though fertility rates are going down very rapidly across the world. So the things that I've described, I'm sure that you would share, are things that we should do, and perhaps we should focus even harder, but we should have been focusing anyway on those things. Business actually can do a lot. Employ more women, help with encouraging women's education. You can make reproductive health care, many firms do, available through the firm, and so on. Markets and market failure. To fail to correct market failure is to distort markets. What we're talking about when we're talking about correcting market failure is 100% pro-market. Those who don't want intervention to halt market failure are in favor of distorting markets. We should be very clear about that. It does involve more than, I was focusing on greenhouse gases. There's a lot more, and I think water is of prime importance. And after all, climate change works. The impacts of climate change are largely through water. That's storms, floods, droughts, desertification, sea level rise. It's a very coherent agenda looking at climate change and water at the same time. And what we're doing in the waste that we make of water in the world is absolutely criminal. And a lot of it is about not getting markets involved sufficiently well. The upshot is, of course, of not pricing water properly is the poorest people in the world pay the highest price for water. And that is a lesson that we have to understand. The very last point that was made is that this industrial revolution has to be driven much more by public policy than past industrial revolutions. It's a fundamentally important point. That doesn't mean it won't happen or it shouldn't happen. It is something that has to be driven by public policy. Public policy has to be driven by leadership, and it has to be driven by demand from what people want. Those people who, you know, like many people in this room, I've got grandchildren at very young ages. This isn't some abstract future generation. It's them that we're talking about. So it is in our interests. It's very powerfully in our interests to manage climate change properly, but it's in our collective interest. It's a public good issue, which means that the demand has to come from communities as a whole. Now, I think the cheerful thing is that in large parts of the world, that demand is coming, and it's also being reflected in leadership. And it has to be those two things working together if we're to create the kind of public policy we need. We get direct benefits from energy efficiency without necessarily going to the public good story that I've been describing. A lot of it is very attractive anyway. The combination of the IT revolution and this energy revolution is actually fortuitous for the world, because a lot of energy efficiency will be driven by IT. But you can't get away from the basic that this one has to be driven by public policy, and if public policy is to kick in, it has to be top and bottom, people demanding it, leadership giving it.
Thank you. I'm being told to sort of move you over to lunch. I would like to just thank the panel for pointing out that there are many ways to get to our objective, but that just for us to remember that we're actually all working in the same direction. And what we need to do is actually bring the policy closer to where the private sector is going so that we can actually work together in complementary ways. Please help me to thank the panel, Cherie, Dr. Supachai, and Fung. Thanks a lot. We're supposed to roll over to lunch.